got St. Anne's Church here, so St. Anne is an Anglican church, and it's in St. Joseph. It's built between 1853 and 1855 with the abolition of slavery in mind. That was a chapel of ease. So were Quakers buried there? No, I don't think. Well, there may have been some, but that they're not going to be identified as Quakers. 1760 to 1790 is when they disappeared from Barbados. Around that time, they had one particular meeting had outlawed slavery. There's still a few left, and some of them stayed in Barbados. And now I've taken a year off from this, looking at Quaker burials. I had left you with saying that I was going to deal with Richard Goddard when he next came back to this. I'm going to leave him out of this at the moment. He actually, his contribution was from 1795 onwards. So he did not really get the first Quakers. He was well after they had all left. St. Anne's Church was built on land given by Grogan, a fellow called John Grogan. And he was at retreat. So,
the first settlers of Barbados were Puritans, 1626, 1627. This is 2 or 3 years after the birth of George Fox. The earliest Quaker will they found was of John Cole, dated 1645. It had the words, "Friend, Lieutenant John Reeves," RB 611, page 575. At the time, John Cole was about to undertake a voyage to England. Barbados was not the first choice. St. Kitts was. St. Kitts or St. Christopher was settled 1624, 3 years before Barbados. The French were settled there as well, so it was obvious that they would have to share. This wasn't a good idea. Indigenous people were also there as well. Plus, a year after, there was a hurricane, which razed all buildings to the ground. So, Barbados made sense. So why were these islands settled? The answer is America. America offered an opportunity, but to get there in ships of sail, it was necessary to make a detour. Alright, the first will of anyone in Barbados was 1639. The first settlement was 1627, 12 years different. The first will was of Thomas Cook, RB 613, page 151. He was not, obviously, the first death in Barbados. What was his religion? It was not Quaker. Certainly, George Fox was 15 at the time. So what was it like to be buried as a Quaker? The most compelling physical evidence is the graves they left. However, there are no grave markers for early Quakers. When they were permitted, that's probably in the 18th century, grave markers had to be simple. Grave markers were small. Many of these settlers chose to be buried as Quakers after 1645. First will. Doesn't mean he was the first Quaker, but the first will. Many Quakers chose to be buried in the parish churchyard. Still, many chose to be buried in private lands or Quaker burial grounds. Many left no will. Contrary to popular belief, most people in Barbados at the time were Quakers. So where were they buried? Around Barbados, in the gardens and orchards of Barbados. Questions. Where are the Quaker burial grounds? Where are the slave burial grounds? So the answer is in the gardens and orchards of Barbados.
Edward Einstein owned, or at least controlled, Einstein's town. This is a port town which traded with England. He also sold the land that he bought to people you see here. So Edward Einstein was at Ridge, and from Ridge he controlled this area of land through what he paid for the land, £1,000, and 1,000 acres he got. So he was in control up here. Now Edward Einstein was a violent man, given to fits of rage, and he fed it with drink. This is what is said of him. In 1629, Einstein was this man. In 1669, Edward Einstein was dead and buried, and either the son or his nephew was shown in the wooded area between Newton and Ridge. Edward Einstein, from 1629, had said the land which he had sold, the land which he had bought, to other interests. Newton, right here, had bought a storehouse in Einstein's, right here, from Einstein. Mayo shows Austin in 1722 between Newton and Ridge. Okay, so now we're going to look at geolocating the files of the fields on top of the map from that time. We are going to look at this area here, which would seem to be Newton's burying ground, and this in here, which seems to be Einstein's burying ground. It's pretty difficult to differentiate the two on this map, and we can zoom in and just to show you that the fields which have been accurately placed, the fields which have been accurately placed on the map using the 1951 aerial photo. I don't get the type of accuracy I want, so you have to zoom in and a little bit more and look, and you'll see what I mean. It's inaccurate, so you start then to use the aerial photos of Barbados. Okay, I've zoomed in pretty closely, and it still can't get it accurate. The burial grounds do not match exactly how the road lies here. So I am saying that Austin is here. I'm saying that the burial ground that we consider that of slaves today is really that of Quakers yesterday. And all we have to do is to look up when Austin was buried and when this became valid. If we had that information, we could tell if this was an early Quaker burial ground or if it was later, as in the garden fields and so on, as you see nowadays. I think that is the case. We'll wait and see what happens. I'm sure we'll find the data. So hang on. So here you've got the fields of Newton, due reference to the aerial photo of what Newton appeared in, has exactly as Newton appeared in 1951. You have the burial ground garden wall up above the road, and you've got the burial ground, which I think is going to be Austin. Two plantations bought and put together. The smaller burial ground being forgotten, and the larger one holding sway. So that is the problem of Newton.
This is his 1910 Historic Sites Report. I am going to give you 3 pages of this. The first page, which is this, the second page, and the third page, and then I'm going to just look for the third page. I'm just going to give you one finding, and then I'll go on to my basic treatise. This is the second page of the Historic Sites Report. It's done by 5 men. His Lordship the Bishop, C.P. Clark, he's the Solicitor General, Mr. Boyne, he's the Superintendent of Public Works, A.G. Sinclair, he's the Police Magistrate for District E, and Reverend Wilfred Brown. The Honourable Secretary of the Committee looking into the historic sites was A.G. Sinclair. The first meeting of the committee was held on November the 12th, 1909, and the report was sent in June the 17th, 1910. This is the third page of the Historic Sites Report that I'm going to deal with. I'm going to start at Adams Castle Plantation. The site of C. Archer's Monumental Inscription, page 380. And what they say is this is a stone with Latin inscription, the memory of Sir Robert Hackett, who died 1679. Now, this is gone today. That is in a field called Garden Peace, and that was right next to Aberdare. Aberdare used to be the yard for Adams Castle plantation. So you have the field with all of the barrels in it. That has been taken over by Intel, and then Sheraton. That's since 1975 at least. So it's gone. At Corey Plantation, there's a tomb there, near the site of the former Mansion House. The police were unable to find out to what family it belonged. Perhaps it belonged to the Coverley family, among those who in 1638 owned more than 10 acres of land was Thomas Coverley. I think it actually belongs to Tobias Frere. If you look at the Ford map, you'll see that in 1675 that all the plantations that in that area were owned by the Frere family. So I suspect that is fair. What also leads me to that's a suspicion is the fact that the will of Tobias Frere has that he wishes to be buried in the vault with his wife. So that, I think, is Tobias Frere's the final resting place. If you look, you will not see any inscription. Now, that has all been swept away by the villages at Coverley development. Now, at Bannatyne Plantation, there's a tomb, and there's a piece of the bits and pieces of the stone. Now, I've never seen it, but I am told that it contains a memory of Dr. Carew, the surgeon, and his brother Christopher Carew. Carew owned Providence, it looked like, on the Ford map. If you look now for parish land near Silsborough Plantation, there is a tomb here with an inscription thereon to the memory of Charles Collins, aged 70 years, who died July 1st, 1697. Charles Collins was judge of the Spikes Bay in 1686. Calendar of State Papers, page 685 to 88. 685 to 88, page 180. That is on the corner going to the, I've never seen it, going to the current burial place, which is at um, which is at the current burial place, and that is more or less. I don't know if it's there or if it isn't, but it was there.
Okay, so you're going to look at all the plantations in Christchurch that field names exist for. And what you're going to find is Adams Castle and Bannatyne. They stand out. They were discovered in 1910. But also Bentley has a garden ground. So too does Coverley, a vault which could be of the Tobias Frere. There's also this Pear's Garden Gap. Mayo refers to Pear's Garden on his map. There's a green garden up in Christchurch, close to Silver Sands, and Hannah's has a burial, which is Ince. I haven't seen that one. Hope is a name that was bound to be Quaker. Two fields named Upper and Lower Garden Wall, located south next to the yard. Newton, well, we found that Newton and Oyston are very close. And you've got a carnelian stone that was found as a grave good with one of the bodies buried. What you also find is that some research shows that these examples of samples of teeth come from Bristol. Searles, North and South Chapel Field, they're two fields that are named after chapel. And then there's a chapel. Well, not really a chapel. There's an area of ground which no one really owns, except now that it is owned by Searles. Chapel Field and Chapel. Charles Collins is buried there in 1697. Located there, very near to Collins on the 722 Mayo map, which became part of Searles. He was a judge at Spikes Bay. And then there's Taple Grove also. Two fields named East and West Gardenway Field. In the 50s or 60s, human remains were unearthed when construction was undertaken by Mr. Ward. The fields border on the yard. A good book to have a read of is called The Quaker Community on Barbados by Larry Gray. It's published, I think, in 2009. Around that time is when I had figured out, after 15 years of research in the archives, that there was definitely a class of people who were very different. What he wrote was, Quakers on Barbados also established their own cemeteries. And he goes on and he talks about Oyston, the same person that I talked about before. After 1690, however, reflecting the growing maturity of the sect and to the emergent infrastructure, they left something or the other to be interred among the people called Quakers. So that's one way of having an idea that what is referred to as the slave burial ground at Newton is actually a Quaker burial ground. But if you want to be absolutely certain that it is a Quaker burial ground, look at the research. Isotopic evidence for anthropogenic lead exposure on 17th, 18th century Barbadian plantations. The nub of this is that if we look at the isotopic evidence of what is left in the enamel on the teeth, they all mirror Bristol. The person who whose DNA was never really looked at came from Bristol. So I think that's pretty close. It's not pretty damning. So finally, let's get to conclusions. The Quakers were really about equality, even in death. And here you can have a good read of Quaker burial ground, of Quaker burial grounds in America that have been repurposed, well, not repurposed really, redone and kept to give us the message. So that is that Jesus is supreme and you can't fight it. So there it is.